Welcome back to the Business of Biotech. I'm your host, Ben Comer, Chief Editor at Life Science Leader, and today I'm speaking with Dr. Monika Sumra, founder and managing partner at Bunka Incorporated, a management consulting firm and advisor to manufacturing-based organizations globally. Monika is a published author and speaker with a unique lens built on a Ph.D. in biosocial anthropology. Her work with life sciences organizations sits at the intersection of leadership, performance, and environment. By focusing on environment, Bunka helps organizations develop and set the conditions for sustainable leadership, responsibility, and results. I'm pleased to speak with Monika today about how life sciences companies can build better work environments to set themselves up for success, how to bring quantitative analysis to corporate culture, and how the tools of anthropology can be used to drive efficiencies in key functional areas like manufacturing. Monika, thank you so much for being here.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to speak with you. I think you bring an interesting perspective that we haven't heard on the business of biotech. And I want to maybe just start there with your background. I mentioned you received a PhD, biosocial anthropology from the University of Toronto. How did you become initially interested in this field?
So, very good question. And for me, it's always really been, I've always been interested about learning how people actually behave when the stakes are real, not how we say we behave or how we design systems, really assuming how people will behave. So these are things that I was always interested in. And so anthropology really gave me a way to really study humans in context, right? That's what anthropologists do. And the great thing about anthropology is that it doesn't separate people from environments. And what we look at as anthropologists in any sort of social context is, how does power, hierarchy, uncertainty, and really meaning, shape behavior over time. And that's really what made me very, very interested in it. And once you start seeing behavior that way, a lot of what we call failure really starts to look more like adaptation over time. And for me, that's the whole idea of being interested in that was just interesting actually about human beings, just more generally, because I happen to be one. So it's just really going deeper and really understanding my own ways of thinking, challenging myself, and really becoming that individual who really takes all these different perspectives into consideration, before coming to a conclusion. So that's really what got me interested in it as I progressed.
Have you always been a kind of student of human behavior? Or was that something like even as a child or a young adult that you were kind of like thinking about and then, ultimately crystallized in this, field that you could follow? Or was it something that kind of struck you later on as just a really important and super interesting area to learn more about?
If we had all the time, I told the whole story, but I've always been interested in it. I think like many people, I did lose my way, right? Going through, when you're younger, you're so inquisitive. You really want to learn about all the differences out there, different thoughts and different ways of understanding. And then as we grow older, I think into adults, we start to become more sedimented in our ways, and we kind of, veer towards things that make us feel more comfortable. And that comfort, I think, in a way now, if I look at it, since you asked me that question, seems more like an adaptation to that particular situation. So there did come a point in my time where I thought, I was pretty good at understanding perspectives. I've got this down pat. But then when I went back to university, so I actually went back to university when I was much older in my life and got my PhD, my master's and my PhD most recently in 2019. So I'm a very new doctor, if you will. And it was during that time I realized, wow, there's a lot I really don't know about the world. And I really need to open my eyes in a more profound way in order to really understand what's truly irking individuals and what's truly shaping their lives. And so, yeah, I did have it as a child, short answer. I kind of got used to life the way it was. And then it became revitalized, and I've never looked back since. It's always still about that for me.
Can you describe maybe some of your research that you did during the doctorate program? I'm curious kind of about what you were studying.
Yeah, that's a great question. So my doctoral research really focused on how leadership identities really get constructed. So how, unstable many of our assumptions really are about leadership. And leadership traits. That's what I was really looking at. The human alpha female was my focus, and that work really came out of that thinking. When I really dug deep, I found that the term really got borrowed from animal research, right? And it's used very loosely in human context. We hear it a lot. That person's an alpha, and this is an alpha behavior. So I really wanted to understand, what does that actually mean in real social life? If it meant anything consistent at all, because like I said earlier, people had different perceptions and perspectives of things. So what really became clear for me very quickly was that the behaviors that people were, really labeling as alpha, they aren't fixed traits. So they shift actually depending on context, on expectations, what's rewarded and what's sanctioned. So you can be alpha in one environment and not in another. It's not like a one size fits all sort of thing. So the idea of leadership and influence and status really turned out to be very situational. When I did the research, it's not inherent, which is sometimes the mistake we make as human beings, and we label things and we say that's just the way it is. So that insight really, that leadership is shaped by environment. I mean, that's where this whole journey for me kind of started. That carries directly into my work today. So in a nutshell, that's really what my research was about.
What were the circumstances that led to the founding of Bunka? At what point did you decide, this is something that I can make an impact in, or that I can help companies be better at? What were those circumstances?
So really, once I started working with organizations, in the consulting field with my business partner, the connection for me was really immediate, right? Organizations, believe it or not, are human systems. And that's what they are. They're human systems. So that was a big epiphany for me. So when I started, really thinking about this, I'm sure everybody would agree that, a lot of operational and performance problems get framed as execution or capability issues, right? Mm-hmm. But when you really look closely, they're often really a predictable outcome of the conditions that people are operating in. We just take the time to look at those conditions. So, and
those are less visible though, right?
Yeah,
than
they're
like
less visible, or they're visible, but you become so acclimated to them that they become invisible. They don't really factor into the situation. I like to call those things weak signals, if you will. So, and what anthropology does is it gives us the tools and the thinking and the mindset and the discipline really to go deeper, much deeper, into assumptions, into motivations, interpretations, and the patterns really beneath what people do. So it also allows us to see how those layers, right, really shape the outcome that we later measure as performance. So those numbers tell us a story. And what anthropology allows us to do in this way is to find a story and tell me what that story is behind those numbers.
Yeah. Can you just for the audience give an example or two of life sciences clients, or if not specific clients, is the kind of companies that Bunka can help?
Yeah, absolutely. Like right now, we actually primarily work with biotech, pharma, medical device organizations, and even food manufacturing, the ones that are heavily invested in compliance and, regulations, right? But especially we work with companies that are really in growth or transition, and sometimes both, right? Those types of environments really, these environments really are with uncertainty. They have long timelines they have to think about, and of course, regulatory pressures. There's a lot of that. So these types of organizations usually have a lot to coordinate across disciplines and often under ambiguity. So there's not It's not really clear all the time. So this is actually where the understanding the system, not just the org chart, really becomes critical. And that's kind of the type of companies that we work with and use our for. Really, you can use Bunka with any company to do anything, but this is kind of our niche.
Got it. Got it. Well, I want to get into kind of strategies for improving various functional areas, manufacturing efficiency, et cetera. But before we do that, I want to just kind of zoom out a little and think about leadership broadly and how you think about leadership using this anthropological lens. We've talked some about environment. We'll get back into that, but maybe my first question is, what trends are you noticing with respect to leadership positions, and the people that want to be leaders? And if you want to say something kind of broadly just about anthropology and leadership and how you think about it starting off.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share some trends with you to a couple of things that I am seeing. Firstly, I mean, anthropology really is a science of humanity. It's a science of human beings. So what better way to look at a human system than through that lens, right? So for me, I really want to privilege that, and I'm very honored that I can do that. But anthropologically, I don't start with the leader. You asked me, what do I think about leadership more generally? So I don't start with the leader. I start with really what shapes the conditions around them, right? So leadership isn't really just a role, or a set of traits. It really is a function that only becomes possible when the system supports judgment, accountability, and influence. So the system has to support that. And the reason I say this, because I hear often, when we work with individuals in the past or people have gone through, they're very good leaders, they're very good players, they're really great at what they do. And most people are. But they struggle, and they struggle, or they give up, or they leave. It's because the environment doesn't take them in that direction. And those that do get fortified in that environment do different things. So my first instinct is always really to understand what's beneath what people do, not just what they say they intend. So what is this? This requires then, this anthropological lens, this really requires us to getting beneath that visible behavior, right, into the deeper currents, that are shaping culture. So assumptions, motivations, trust, and like you said earlier, like kind of the unspoken rules about what's safe, what's risky to do and what's risky not to do. So to do that, I look at how decisions really are actually made. How do they actually get made? How does information flow? Where do people feel safe speaking up? And where do they feel that they've got to protect themselves? So anthropology lets me see these deeper patterns rather than just measuring, specific surface behaviors, right? So I get to go really, really deep. And so for me, once you see leadership in that way, your focus shifts from fixing individuals and laying blame to really shaping the conditions so that people's judgment actually matters, right? And that's what we want at the end of the day. I hear this a lot. And when we're in that space, where people's judgment actually matters, that's where sustainable performance follows. And I get asked that question all the time. How do you create sustainability? Well, you have to create the environment that allows for the leaders to create that sustainability. That's the way to do it. So the trends that I'm seeing, I see that a lot of people are shying away. I see a lot of people shying away from becoming leaders or going into a leadership role, I would say. People are individually leaders, and a lot of the answers, you hear is, hey, it's too much pressure. It's very demanding of me. I have to be accountable for so much. I'm not good at the people stuff. How do I get people to do things, out of their comfort zone? I want people to be innovative and creative. There's a lot that is expected of a leader, right, today. And that's been shaped a lot about what's happened over the past years, including COVID and now with the coming of AI. So I'm seeing that. I'm seeing people not being as, not challenging themselves as much to go into that, not because they can't do it, but Many are just afraid of, wow, my neck is going to be on the line if I do this. Can I keep going that fast? Can I balance my family life with all this pressure? So the prestige or the servanthood, I guess, of leadership is becoming less and less, attractive for lack of a better word. And I'm seeing that. I'm seeing good leaders. Every leader is good. I will say this, right? They're all doing what they need to do. But I've also seen trends where no matter how talented a person is, the environment doesn't allow that individual to exercise their talents in the way they need to. And that puts strain on them. And so what do a lot of people do in those situations? They leave or they check out. And so that's another trend, a lot of talent loss, right? A lot of knowledge loss. And a lot of these things, to me, they go back to leadership, but leadership has to be sustained in an environment. So those are a couple of things that I'm seeing over the past few years. And I'm seeing it more and more now than ever before.
That's really interesting. And I think it takes us back to this underlying system and an environment that a leader is working in. And you talk about, going deep on these, what are the motivations? What are these kind of ingrained almost mores that exist,
Yeah.
within a company? How do you uncover those things? How do you find out, what those motivations are? Is it, just like long, extensive conversations with various employees? Like how do you get at those kind of underlying elements that seem so important to whether or not a leader and a company, is able to succeed?
That's a really, really good question. And it's a lot of work. So when we go deep, first of all, we have to have a very skilled team that's going to look at very different areas of the organization. But a lot of it is we use the anthropological approach, right, to collecting data. We need to look at all the hard data. We want to look at all the KPIs. We look at all that information. We have conversations with people. We do observations where we're trained in understanding the nuances of behavior. So it's basically a collection of all this qualitative and quantitative data. And then obviously we do a deep analysis of that to connect the behaviors and assumptions with the performance at the end of the day. But it does involve time, right? But we do something called rapid ethnography, if you will. So that there's ways to do it very quickly. When you have the right team, you're looking at the right issues, we're able to go in and do that as well. Now, we don't just go in and uncover things where things are going wrong. Like I said earlier, sometimes companies want to grow. And they're doing great. They have sustainable results, but it's okay. What could be lurking in the background that could prevent us from, when we acquire this organization, what could happen to us? Is there an obstacle that we're not seeing? So that's what we would go in and go deeper. But basically, we go in using the methodologies, and we have a very specific methodology we use to go in and uncover all these things. But we partner with the people in the organization. So we're not coming in on the top and just doing that. We were living and breathing and feeling what everybody else is trying to feel in their daily lives and how they're making meaning of it. And so a lot of it involves all these different aspects. And our team goes out and, we divide and conquer and then come back and then we paint that picture. I often use the analogy, the picture on the puzzle box. That's kind of what I use quite often. So if you think about it, most companies probably have a good idea of what that picture looks like. Maybe it was perfectly, in color and everything was perfect when it was formed, but over time it may have faded or there's some cracks. So we want to go and see, well, what was that picture, or is there even a picture? And what does that picture actually look like now? So we may come up with something that's a little more fractured, or something that's, just a little faded, but it's still there and there's opportunities there. So that's what we kind of do at the end of the day. We paint the picture that you already painted before, but show you what it looks like now. And based on what you're looking for, work with solutions with the company itself. Our goal is not to come in and do the work for you. We can do that. The goal is to help you sustain those results. So it's using all these human ways of doing it. We have very specific um, measures we use, very specific ways of collecting data, analyzing the data. We use very robust analytical systems so that you can actually measure and see really what the story is, right, behind those KPIs. So I hope I answered your question
No,
there.
that's really interesting, and I want to ask a follow-up on that. Bringing quantitative analysis to an area like culture, environment, for example. These are areas that are considered soft sciences often and are sort of governed by feel. And people say, yeah, we have a great corporate culture, but what more could you say, Monica, about bringing hard data to a soft science like corporate culture? Can you give me an example of maybe one or two things that you're
Yeah.
collecting data around?
Absolutely, I can. The This is where kind of the field of anthropology really comes in. So as an anthropologist, we're doing a lot of statistical analysis. We take qualitative data and we quantify the qualitative data. So it was that sort of thinking and that sort of research methodology, that has influenced, some of the things that we do now here at Bunka. So we use something that we've developed called CPIs. So everybody knows what a KPI is.
Key
Although I never
performance
make an
indicator,
assumption.
right?
I never make an assumption because sometimes people mean something else. But CPIs, we call them cultural performance indicators. And they work kind of hand in hand with the KPIs. If you think of a KPI, KPIs tell you what already happened, right? It's already happened. So it's a lagging indicator, if you will, right? But CPIs that we've designed and we customize them depending on the situation we're looking at and what our clients are looking to achieve. They tell me what's forming now. So they tell you the human conditions that are shaping future results. So it's your eye into the future, right? It's that window into the future. So together, when CPIs are paired with KPIs, they really reveal that full system. So you're now looking at the system with both eyes wide open. So there's no softness there. It's very, very measurable, and it's actually hard to deal with soft stuff. Yeah, it's kind of a little bit of an oxymoron, but it is. It's very difficult because even though it's innate to us as human beings, how do you quantify that? How do you look at it and make it visible? So our goal is to make the invisible visible, measure it. And then a couple of examples I can give you. You know, again, I just repeat: KPIs tell you what already happened. CPIs are going to tell you what's forming now, the human conditions that are shaping those future results. So what we could be measuring for somebody would be things like trust flow. What does the trust flow look like? What is the decision latency look like? You know, how long does it take on average for a decision to stay stuck somewhere, right?
Mm.
And belief alignment. I get this question asked often. We have all these beliefs and values. How do we know if people are aligned? The other thing is, I sometimes ask leaders, you have a vision, you have a strategy that you've got in your head. How do you know if people are aligned with that? To what degree is that alignment? So that's another example. Things like follow through, measuring that. That's a good CPI, right? And these are things that are kind of all upstream of speed, quality, reliability, and execution. So hand in hand together, it's pretty magical because you get this really full picture of, okay, now when I make a decision, I can see the whole thing. Now that picture on the puzzle box is really, really clear. I can see the fine lines in it, not just some sort of faded hue, right? So that's an example of how you take that, what is the people think is soft, and show you that it's actually powerful. Maybe soft, but it's very powerful.
Right. Most, if not all of the leaders I've spoken with on the business of biotech agree that company culture, directly correlates or even causes good or bad company performance. But then often they don't have much more to say about corporate culture and kind of what what makes it or breaks it beyond a kind of statement of values, many of which are quite similar across different companies. Patients first, of course, as kind of an example. What does anthropology have to say about corporate culture, and I guess how do you think about, and you just gave some, I think, really interesting examples of data that you can bring to some of this, but how do you think about improving a company's culture?
So there's a couple of things. Firstly, culture isn't just, the value statements you were just talking about, or visible behaviors. It's really built, like I said earlier, from deeper layers. It's built from assumptions, beliefs, interpretation, behaviors, actions, all those things. And all of those layers are really shaped by conditions that people are operating in, right? So I always say, people ask me this question often, Monika, how do you change culture? I wrote an article on this too. And I always say, the best way to change culture is don't fix it, because you can't change culture directly. Culture is an emergence. It emerges, right? So what you have to do is you've got to work on the conditions shaping belief and behavior, right? When we work on those conditions and those conditions start to shift, then culture shifts, right? So when culture shifts, now performance becomes more predictable and sustainable. And that's what every company is looking for. I walk in the door, I know how my day's going to go. I know what I can deliver to the marketplace. I know what my people are capable of. It's that assurity everybody's looking for. But when you're trying to change culture, because culture doesn't actually exist as a thing, it is a product of everything else. So you really can't change that. The analogy I often use about culture is when you're trying to create the right culture or inputs, your culture has to be kind of like Jell-O, right? And if you think about Jell-O, like you make a mold of Jell-O, it has a form, right? It's got this form, you can see it, but it wobbles, right? It has flex built into it. So culture must have flex built into it. And a lot of the times I think people are looking to define culture as something fixed and permanent. And by its very nature, culture is dynamic. It changes all the time. So obviously it can't be a thing that you change. It's the things you bring into it that have to change. I'll give you a very clear example. Think about it. A new leader comes on board with a different thought process, different experience. They're going to bring a different lens into the mix, right? And that's going to change things. And people will say, well, that's not our culture. That's not the way we do it. We do it like this. The culture is all about change. It's all about moving and grooving. So once you create, it goes back to what I said right at the beginning. It's the environment that has to be created. The culture will emerge from that. And so when we're hiring people, when we're changing processes, when we're doing all these things for the organization, we've got to ask ourselves, are all these things going to be in service to the environment that we want? Because it is that environment that's going to create the culture that's going to give us the performance we're looking for. So that's how, I guess, the discipline to think about how I, as an anthropologist, think about it. And not just as an anthropologist, as a business leader myself, as someone who operates my own business, this is the way I think, and this is the way it is for me, right? And that's the lens we look. And so, yeah, I wonder what you have to say about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wanted to actually ask you about, you mentioned ethnography earlier, and I remember, being in a kind of sociology 101 class in college, and I was always really taken by ethnography. I thought it was super interesting, but I feel like culturally we've kind of moved away from anthropology with more of a focus, I think, on large quantitative data sets. And the reason I bring this up is I would love to have you, Monika, explain what ethnography is for folks that maybe aren't don't know what that particular field is, and kind of how that plugs into the work that you do with life sciences companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to say though that the quantitative data is extremely important. So
Sure, absolutely.
when
It's
we
not
think
a
of
one or the other, right?
yes, exactly. And traditional anthropologists, if you look at sociocultural anthropologists, they're always looking at the social, the behavior, all that stuff that I talked about. But we do ethnography a little bit differently. We do both because we're business people. We understand that the numbers, at the end of the day, it's about the dollars and cents. It's about the profit. It's about getting that order. It's about getting stuff out to the client. It's about potential recalls and deviations. Those things are very important. But we look at those through the lens of saying, okay, this is telling us a lot more about the behaviors that shape that. So we take them together. So ethnography really, in very simple terms, it's really the systematic observation of how work actually happens. That's how we look at it, right? So for us, it's actually happens means it means the numbers, it means the data collection, it means how we look at the data, how do we interpret the data, it means qualitative, quantitative, it means all of it, right? The whole shebang. So we're not just looking at things ethnographically, we're talking about ethnography. We're not looking just at how things are designed on paper. So I could think of a process flow. We're not just looking at, what is the ideal process, and we're looking at what happens in each step in the process. What was the environment of each of the steps of the process? What happens in between, behaviorally, scientifically, socially, and even from a process perspective, regulatory compliance. So our team looks at all that, right? So we're not just looking at design on paper from point to point, and not how people say it happens, but what actually happens. Okay. Especially at those points, where interpretation really creeps in, or people compensate for ambiguity, right? So if something's unclear, what is it that they do? Do they escalate it? Do they work around it? Do they put their hand up? Do they ask somebody who's more experienced? What are they doing to get past that ambiguity, right? So you can see that even though what I'm telling you is behavioral in itself, it has a very big impact, right? It's powerful. So it's not really soft. It's actually probably very critical, right? So for us, that's how we surface this invisible kind of friction in the system, and also the invisible areas of, greatness in the system, right? It's not just friction that we find too. We find, wow, could this be a best practice? Like, is this repeated somewhere else? This is really incredible the way things are done here. So we're not just looking at it from one lens, it's the whole thing. So this is why the way we do ethnography, I will say, is I would say the non-traditional way, if we were to think about it in terms of how it would be done just behaviorally. We did look at it all. It's all of it has to be taken into consideration. That's what the output we give is very unique at the end of the day, right? Because we're actually showing this particular behavior is connected to this result. And that blows people away because you tell them the story of how it got there, right?
Right.
And that's not soft. That's a clear path.
And you have to go deep to understand that. I mean, when I was thinking about ethnography, I'm thinking about the anthropologist who goes and lives, with a small tribe for months at a time, and really catalogs every tiny little behavior that's happening in that dynamic to try to understand what's happening in that specific, example. And so, when you talk about understanding environment, understanding leadership, and combining kind of a larger quantitative analysis with a really deep ethnographic study of the variables, the individual actors within a company, that strikes me as powerful. I want to move on to some of the examples that you might be able to offer, Monika, on functional areas within a company, where you can apply this kind of framework and then measure results. And maybe we can talk about manufacturing, but I'll leave it up to you if there's a different example you want to use. But we've talked a little bit about leadership and environment broadly, but I wonder if we could kind of narrow in a little bit and look at a functional area at a biopharma company, and how you think about using that framework to improve efficiencies in manufacturing, for example.
Right. I mean, as far as functional areas goes, we work with every single area. I
Okay.
think the area where we would focus on would be based on really the need, but you really need that broad brush to understand, because focusing on one area only will never be enough, because even the area, that functional area is performing within a system. So if you've got one area working really, really well, but it doesn't connect to the other parts of that system, it's going to be challenging, right? But typically when we come in, usually the areas we're really focusing on, we get asked in right at the beginning, is aligning quality and operations, right? That's typically maintenance, operations, quality, like getting that triad, that trusted triad, to really speak each other's language, is very important. And one of the things that we really are to really kind of focus on is that quality itself isn't a functional area. Quality must be the way we do the work, right? So, and especially in biotech, this is very important. So a lot of the times, how do you define that? What does that look like? Helping the organizations create that. But typically, when we're going into manufacturing, there's all these different aspects. There's maintenance, there's quality, there's engineering, then you have operations itself. So there's all these different functional areas, supply chain, all warehouse, all these things that have to kind of work in a system to get the work done. But we also look at sales too, right? So if they go functional area, customer complaints are telling me a lot, right? What's that customer complaint telling me? We bring it back and say, okay, well, how does that relate to what we're doing here on the shop floor? So that's really, I would say, where this to live and breathe. And really, it's in any industry. If you think about it, we go back to what we're talking about, the quantitative data, who developed that quantitative data or those data? The human beings did.
Right.
Humans did. Humans developed that. So we have to understand it, because it was developed by people for a specific reason. So with that tells us what it's supposed to tell us at the end of the day, right? So that's really, I think, everything that I can think of in terms of what functional areas. Really, there's no limit. And you said earlier, people have gotten away from thinking about this, ethnography and the behavioral piece. I will say that I see actually tidbits of that every day. People are thinking about it. They are doing these things. And they are thinking about behaviors. They are thinking about all these things. What's challenging is they don't have something to hang it on, or a framework to give it space and to make it visible. And that's what we do. By the time we're done, or even in process, you can see it. You can see that framework. But everybody does have bits and pieces of it, because human beings are human beings after all. They really know what they're doing at the end of the day. So when you look at it, you end up seeing, when you show them what they can see, but you show it in a form that's understandable, it makes it a lot easier. And in biotech, it's different from company to company too, depending on the industry you're in, depending on what class of pharma product you're making, or class of medical device you're manufacturing. It's that framework is going to change, but it'll become visible and it'll make sense to you within that environment. So I hope that makes sense.
No, that's excellent. I want to just maybe follow up on that. You talked about alignment, across business functions at times, certainly between individuals. What more could you say, Monika, about aligning mindset or aligning beliefs between individual team members, and kind of how you do that? You also mentioned the example of, for example, a new leader coming into a company that maybe has a different perspective than the former leader, has a kind of different way of doing things, maybe a different set of beliefs. What can you say about that mindset connection between individual team members, and how do you work on that?
Very, very good question. And it's a very deep answer. Leaders must be responsible for, aligning those beliefs and behaviors across the entire operation, right? That's it's really up to them at the end of the day, their effort. at the end
They
of
have
the day.
to actively do it.
Actively do it, right? Because the idea of different perspectives, or what I like to call perspectivism, right? Which is, appreciating the perspectives of others, even if you don't agree with it, you're appreciating it, you're understanding it, you're bringing it in. That difference, that's what I would call difference, right? The difference is only an asset if an environment can integrate it.
Hmm.
So the leaders first and foremost must be able to do that, right? So their role should be in not creating sameness, right? But creating shared meaning. Because sameness means it's just going to be done this way. We all have to agree on this, and we'll get going. And that's when people's thought processes start to creep in. That's when the workarounds come in. That's when not following a procedure comes in, or finding a different solution comes in, because we're not appreciating the perspectives, right? We have to, obviously, in biotech, there are certain things you must do in a certain way. You cannot deviate from that, right? So if we know that, we have to build the fact that it's possible that somebody could deviate. So how do we build that into the process? Because we can't deviate from that, because we know human beings work like that. So that's what I mean by thinking about it. I'm not saying build it in, but understand that that's a possibility. So a leader's role, like I said, is to share, create that shared meaning across groups, so that the differences of opinion and differences of thought improve decisions rather than create friction, right? And that is really the delicate role that a leader plays. And I always say, when a new leader comes into an organization, the first thing they need to do is wander. You have great ideas. You were brought in. You are amazing at what you do. Maybe the board of directors thought, hey, you're going to come and bring that stuff you did in company X and help us become like that, or get there. Yes, you can do that. But you can only do that if you know where you're going to get pushed at, where it might be okay to do it, where it might not be okay to do it. Maybe it's already happening somewhere and you can leverage that. So you've got to wander, spend the time wandering, spend the time understanding the business, even if you know the business, because you don't know that business. So really understand what the environment is. What is the environment, and how am I going to be responsible for shaping it or changing it so that I get the results that I need at the end of the day, right? And that's hard to do when leaders come in. They're put under pressure right away, right? Get this done and get this done. So, that's where we come in, and we can help you. But even you can find your own help and say, look, I gotta slow down here for a minute. I gotta really understand the lay of the land, right?
Yeah,
So
right.
you got to go in and let people take you. Don't push your way in, right?
Right.
You learn so much.
What about it's 2026. I'm getting emails about it. We're hearing more and more about different types of AI implementations in the life sciences sector every day. And I want to, thinking about environment, culture, leadership. What are some of the things that life sciences companies should think about in terms of leadership and organizational culture before, you know, implementing AI tools? How do you advise companies on that?
I always say, we need to think about AI not as a plug and play fix, right? Often that's what we think of any tool that you want to introduce into your organization. It's like it's going to fix this, right? We just put it in here, it's going to fix. I always say it's important to think of AI as a magnifier, right, of whatever environment already exists. So what do I mean? Before you adopt, AI broadly, it's very important to understand what's actually shaping how people work, how they interpret information, and how do they make decisions. Not just what you say you value, but what people actually experience, right? So if leaders elevate, intentions without, examining the lived conditions that people are in, that any strategic tool, including AI, can actually cause them to drift away from the outcomes that they were trying to support in the first place and achieve in the first place. So what does that mean? I would say it's important to kind of ask some questions, right off the bat. If you're thinking of putting AI in there, do people feel safe, right, to share truth, risk, and uncertainty? That's really important because you want to know that. Is judgment supported? When people exercise judgment, is it supported with authority and accountability? Are the incentive structures, for example, do they align with what you say and with what you want, right? We have to understand that what AI will do is it'll amplify patterns, okay, good and bad, right? Faster than anything else because it is AI, right? What you feed it, it's going to feed on what you feed it, right? And give you that. So if the conditions aren't solid to begin with, then AI is going to just simply scale the confusion even more, right? There's going to be more bias and more misalignment. So really, it's not about choosing tools first per se. It's really about understanding the environment, the culture very, very deeply and ensuring, making sure that leadership, environment, and human experience are really intentionally aligned before you start layering any technology on top of it. Otherwise, it's going to amplify. And you'll wonder why, hey, we got this in, it's not really helping us. Well, because we didn't go back to see, how people are actually creating meaning of this. I mean, I hear this a lot. People are afraid of AI. Many people think their jobs are going to become obsolete. There's lots of stuff out there. So companies need to understand that even though somebody might say yes, leaders will say yes, use AI, even they have some form of fear. Even they have some sort of, it's uncertainty, but it's the unknown. And when any human being is faced with the unknown, what do? We Google things. We try to find a fix, we try to implement things, and all of that is coming from a place of non-experience. But your true Google or your true information is the people going down and finding out what's going on. That's really where you're going to get everything you need to know. So AI is very powerful. It can be a great partner, but we want to make sure that it's a partner that's going to be lifelong and not a temporary relationship.
Right. Yeah.
That's what I would say.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the other uncertain piece about AI, and it's improving every day, it's getting better and better, but it does make mistakes, does hallucinate on occasion. I want to ask, though, about human error and how companies, can think about designing processes, whether, it's manufacturing, clinical research, finance, elsewhere, that account for actual human errors.
So the best way to account for humans making errors is you can make one assumption. I don't like to make assumptions, but the one assumption that I think we should make is that humans are human.
Yeah, they'll make errors, right? I know I will.
Yeah, that's what we learn, right? We will make mistakes, even when we're trained on something. We do it every day. Has anybody ever said, I'm sorry, or I didn't mean it that way? Of course, constantly. We do that in our lives every day. So we've got to remember that error isn't random. It's patterned. So if we think about it that way, we want to really look at the patterns. We want to understand the patterns and then design systems that reduce error instead of reacting to it. And I think that's what we're seeing. We're doing it later in the game and saying, okay, human error, but what were the conditions that shaped that human error? Mm-hmm. We should expect human error. Okay, what were the conditions that shaped that? All right, we need to change those conditions. Because what happens if we say humans made a mistake? What happens?
It's that human's fault, right?
It's the human's fault. We blame them. And when we blame ourselves or someone else, then what ends up happening is our focus now becomes on the individual, fixing the individual or not fixing the individual and not the problem. Because there's no guarantee that if you remove that individual, that another person that goes in the same spot won't make the same mistake, And it's science, we do double-blind experiments. We do it. So as scientists, we know that we have to do it twice. We got to repeat the error. Is it a physical bias? Is it a personal bias? Is it the equipment? What is it? And we don't know until we understand the conditions that cause that error to occur in the first place. Humans are going to make mistakes. like it or not. And so that's what we have to remember right off the bat. And I think if that's the only thing that you remember and you expect that, life becomes much easier because you're going to say, yeah, of course, this person made a mistake. Let's figure out why that happened. And it makes it so much easier because you actually end up putting permanent fixes in there that fix the inherent human behavior, not individual behavior, right? And then the new behavior becomes easier than the old. And that's the other thing I will say, that it is very important when we're trying to do these fixes for human error not to occur, that the new behavior must be easier than the old. It's got to. If it's not, we're creatures of habit. We're going to go back to our happy place. It was easier to do it this way before, so that's the way we're going to do it. So the new, it's going to require work to figure it out. The new one has to be easier. So when we layer, for example, if somebody makes a mistake and we say, all right, we got to add this to the process now, that's going to stop this person from doing this, and you add it again, what we're doing is we're complicating it. So we're actually making it more difficult. And that's why we see the error again, because we made the new behavior more difficult than the old behavior. So of course people are going to like it. We're human beings after all. We want the path of least resistance.
Right.
And that's what I think we need to think about.
That makes a lot of sense to me. In our final minute or two here, Monika, I want to ask you about kind of prospective company creation, thinking about the environment and conditions that companies could perhaps start out with, and set themselves on a kind of trajectory, that they're going to be happy with, and maybe just thinking about your past experiences at Bunka and, the ever-growing number of startup biotechs, that are working to develop innovative therapies for tomorrow. What can you say to them? What advice would you give to someone, a leader perhaps who is thinking about forming a company around a really exciting technology, but they need to get those get the environment right, set themselves up for success? What are a couple of things that they could do or think about in that kind of company formation stage?
I think that, first of all, and I'm going to say that the most important thing is to design the environment for purpose and design it for humans. That may sound easy, but it isn't when you're thinking about producing a very a product that requires so many different processes, so much science, so much technology to make. So often we're designing it, we're fitting it for purpose for the technology that has to create it, right? Or the process that has to create it. Yes, we have to do that too, but we've got to be able to design it for purpose, and we've got to design it for humans because humans are going to use that environment. Humans are going to use those processes. So if we think about it, why do biotech companies exist? They exist really to solve real human problems, right? That's why they exist. The internal system people operate inside has to be built with that same level of intentionality. If we're designing products to solve these real human problems, and the system's got to be designed with the same thought process, right? Human beings are going to be creating this product for other humans to solve real human problems, right? And the trick is humans, the thing I would say is that, humans don't operate well inside systems that are built purely for control and speed. They just don't. They operate well inside, systems where, judgment, authority, and accountability and meaning align. Like there's an alignment to that, right? So before anybody would scale, I would say, or start out, there are two questions I think we need to start asking. The first two questions. And the first thing I would say is, ask yourself, what kind of environment are we building? First one. And what behaviors are we making possible? That is key. If there's behavior, and the way to do that, it's behaviors you don't want to happen, then what are the behaviors you do want to happen? What are you doing to make those behaviors possible? Not just that this is what we want, because otherwise we're expecting people to just do it, that it's inherent. You're creating, remember we just talked earlier about perspectives. Everybody has different perspectives. So you've got to create the system that everybody has to align to that perspective. You can appreciate everything else, but give them a framework right? Give them something to connect to, right? And if you design a system, so that people's judgment matters really in service of a clear purpose, then the leadership can function really, really well, right? And then performance becomes sustainable. That's really what everybody is striving to do. So even if you're opening a biotech company, whatever you're doing, you want sustainable performance at the end of this, right? You want to be able to deliver the product to the people when they need it, how they need it, right? That's what we want at the end of the day. So it starts way back in the environment, and that's the advice that I would give.
Excellent. Before I let you go, Monika, really quick, if you can, you're working on a book. I wonder if you could give us a preview of the topic.
Take a wild guess. The book is going to be really focusing on this idea about environment and how to steward that environment to deliver those results. So yes, I am working on it, and I'm very excited about it. I finally decided to write this book after being asked many, many times, when are you going to write your book? When are you going to write your book? But it was always a different topic, and nothing really mattered to me as much as it does today. And I'll tell you why. I think I had to experience, like the rest of the world, COVID, now experiencing AI. There's all these things that have happened that have really impacted society and how we make meaning just as human beings today of our world, that now's the time for me to write this book. And it's more important than anything. And also given the fact that I'm seeing less and less leaders people wanting to become leaders, it's a little bit of a scary thought, because we need leaders. We need leaders who want to be in those leadership roles to take human beings and society on a journey, and in companies we need this. And so for me, that's a big that's been my push to really think about it. I mean, I'm a mother, but I'm also a grandmother. So I think about, okay, my granddaughter, who is going to lead her tomorrow when she gets a job somewhere? What type of leader should that be? And I want to do something that's going to say something and hopefully inspire people to think about it more deeply, and how we all need to be more responsible for that. So that's the kind of where my head's at with the book. It's still taking shape, so I'm not sure when that'll be done, but I am working very hard on it.
Well, I look forward to reading it, and thank you again for coming on the show, Monika. I really enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it too, Ben. It was absolutely a pleasure.
We've been speaking with Monika Sumra, Ph.D., founder and managing partner at Bunka Incorporated. I'm Ben Comer, and you've just listened to the Business of Biotech. Find us and subscribe anywhere you listen to podcasts, and be sure to check out our new weekly videocast of these conversations every Monday under the Business of Biotech tab at lifescienceleader.com. We'll see you next week, and thanks as always for listening.